If you remember, in the last chapter, 3 angels, one being the Lord, in the disguise of an angel of the Lord, they visited Abraham, and they made a series of promises, and also at the end, they disclosed to Abraham that they are on their way to bring judgment to Sodom. And that's where we left it off. And then at the end of the verse, it says that the Lord left. He went back to heaven. And then we have the 2 angels that remain, and they're on their way to Sodom. So we pick up the story from this point on. Now here's the verse. You can read it. It says, "Now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground, and he said, 'Now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's home and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way.' They said, however, 'No, but we shall spend the night in the square.' Yet he urged them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. And they called to Lot and said to him, 'Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so that we may have relations with them.'" It's a tragic story. You remember who Lot is. He is the nephew of Abraham. He's supposed to be in the company of Abraham, but as you remember in chapter 13 of Genesis, they split their ways. Abraham remained in the high mountains and heights, and Lot decided to go down into the valley. He thought it's beautiful, very green waters and rivers, and therefore there were the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and a number of other cities there. You know the story. Now, these 2 angels arrive, and they notice Sodom, Lot is sitting by the gate of Sodom. Now, sitting at the gate in the old times meant that Lot was in a position of honor. In the old times, when someone was an honorable man, he would sit at the gate. Why? Because people would come to the gate to consult the chiefs, the elders, the judges. They were all people who sat by the gate. You remember in the book of Ruth, when Boaz wanted to deal on the issue of Ruth, whether Ruth was going to be his wife or someone else's wife, he took his case at the gate of the city, and the elders, the chief judges came, and they had to make an assessment, make a decision as to who Ruth should be given to. Well, apparently Lot had not only moved into the city of Sodom, but also he had become a very reputable, very well-known celebrity, a VIP, a judge. And probably by then he was an older man, and people respected his views. So the angels come, and Lot says, "Please come and stay in my house." And they say, "No, we will spend the night in the square." And of course he insists, and they go in. He serves them the unleavened bread. It shows to us that Lot had still some traces of his old beliefs. There was something, because I'm sure in the city of Sodom nobody ate unleavened bread. Unleavened bread was specific to people who had a specific relationship with Jehovah. You remember Melchizedek came and he had bread and wine, and later on in the law of Moses, in the feast, you have very specific instructions on the consumption of bread, and it had to be unleavened. So it goes to tell us that Lot, even though he's in a wrong place, but there is a little bit of that the traces of faith still in him, because he remembers maybe in his uncle's home when something happened supernaturally, they brought the unleavened bread. So he takes them in, gives them a nice dinner, the unleavened bread, and the story begins from there. I wrote down here, Lot's story is a tragic story. It's a story of how small steps lead to huge catastrophic results. To fall doesn't start with a very big step. It starts with small steps. And we've all faced that. We've all seen how we may drift away or fall with small steps. It starts with one thought. It starts with one comment. It starts with one word. It starts with one look. And then it goes to the next one, goes to the next one. You remember how it started? Lot started by complaining to his uncle that there is this problem between our shepherds, and the seed of division was already working in the heart of Lot. Abraham didn't want separation, but Lot did. Abraham was not in favor of Lot leaving him, but Lot did. That was the first step. You know, the fall doesn't happen all of a sudden. It happens gradually. Every one of us sitting here, perhaps in our lives, we've had times where we have fallen into a terrible situation. But how did it happen? It didn't happen all of a sudden. It happened with one step, and the next step, and the next step, and then it leads to a whole series of problems. Why do you think Lot ended up where he ended up? Why do you think he was there? I'll tell you what. Perhaps several factors were instrumental in this. So we're looking at Lot's failure. Possible reasons. Why did he end up where he was? I wrote down some notes there. Familiarity. I wish there were more young people sitting here tonight. They show up, all of them on Sundays. But that's okay. I think maybe later on they can watch this and listen to it. One of the reasons that we fail in our Christian lives or fall in our Christian lives is familiarity. Being related to Abraham was great, but also had a problem with it. Being the child of a Christian leader might be great, but there's a problem with it. Because you get used to, you're familiar with the surrounding. The problem with the second generation is they've been raised in the church, so everything is familiar to them. They know exactly how the worship service is going to be. They know exactly what the pastor is going to say. They know exactly how we're going to do things. Everything is familiar to us. That's why the first generation, they're so excited, and then the second generation, you find, for them, it's just familiarity. They know, we know what our parents are going to say. We know what the church is going to do. He was related to Abraham. After all, Abraham is the man that God speaks to and gives all these revelations. So he was quite familiar, but familiarity does not guarantee spiritual standing. You cannot stand if you just claim to be related or familiar with the terminologies. I am sorry. I apologize to the young people who have heard us say all these words for all these years, because what has happened is that you're now so familiar that there is that danger that if you assume that because you're familiar that would guarantee standing, it doesn't. The other problem was that he had no meaningful fellowship with Abraham. Never read anywhere in Genesis that Lot and Abraham had a close relationship. He seemed to have just followed him when he left the Ur of Chaldeans. He just came along. But did he really have a fellowship? I don't read anywhere that they had any fellowship. The third is he had no personal relationship, perhaps as strong and as deep with God as Abraham had. You don't never read that God spoke to Lot. You never read that God reached out to Lot. This is the first time that God is reaching out to Lot. Even when he went into captivity, there was no direct approach. God had to use Abraham to go and rescue him. And of course, that leads to the fourth point, where there was compromising conditions. Sodom had compromising conditions. You just had to compromise in order to be able to live in Sodom. You couldn't hold your position. You couldn't stand on your position. And of course, when you cannot stand on your position, now look at the world today. We Christians cannot take a stand and be in an uncompromising condition, because the world, the mantra today is everything is okay, everything goes, tolerance, everything is okay. You have to tolerate each other. We've got to accept each other. Inclusivity and all these things. I'm not saying in many things they're not right. Actually, inclusivity in many ways, from maybe a cultural point of view, from a social point of view, they might be wonderful ideals. However, when it comes to the spiritual standing, we cannot be in a condition of compromise. And of course, following that, you have tolerance for perversion. Perversion sets in. Well, apparently Sodom and Gomorrah were cities of extreme perversions, which I'm not going to name them here, but if you read the history and if you go to archaeology and look at what some of these ancient civilizations believed and practiced, you will find perversion was very, very common practices in their cultural understanding. Violence, sexual perversions, and all these things were very much rampant. And that's why in the Old Testament, God comes to the people of Israel and says, for you to be a distinct nation, I have to put boundaries so you do not look like other nations. He was not a party pooper that, you don't have any enjoyment and fun, but he had to make sure that they remain distinct. They remain separated from the other nations, because it had severe consequences. And of course, tolerance for perversion leads to no value for human honor and integrity. When you have in such deep perversions, you end up doing things that you will place no value on human life. In the ancient cultures, particularly Canaanite cultures, they used to sacrifice their children on the altars. That's the result of a perversion, tolerance that leads finally to acts of violence. And apparently in Sodom and also in other ancient cultures, practices like that were always happening, to sacrifice virgins and children to their gods. That's the kind of conditions that Lot has spent his time. And of course, last but not least, is Lot was dependent on the seen, what he could see. He relied on his natural senses. He did not rely on the supernatural leading of God, and always everything that triggered and excited his sensual stimuli, that's where he was. So these men came and surrounded the house, and they said, well, these are two new people in the city, and maybe it was their custom that anyone who visited the city, they would be raped. That's possibly a terrible explanation, but that might be why God was so angry with Sodom, because they had absolutely no respect for any human dignity and value. So they say, bring these men out, because we need to make sure that we have had some form of a relationship with them. So Lot came out and shut the door behind him and said, please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now behold, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with man. Let me bring them to you and do to them whatever you like. Can you hear in the language what kind of terms he's using. He says, do whatever you want to do. I mean, where is the value that you place on your daughters? But he's giving them a carte blanche, saying, you can do whatever you want to do. You can even kill them. I don't care anymore. But what kind of a parental responsibility is that when the parent cannot care for his or her children to the point of freely and willingly offering these daughters, no matter how old they are, they're still his daughters. You can do whatever you like, only do nothing to these men as they have come under the shelter of my roof. But they said, stand aside. This one came in as an alien, and already he's acting like a judge. Now we will treat you worse than them. So they pressed hard against Lot and came to break the door. Wow, it's getting really, really bad. They're saying, who are you to tell us what we're going to do? You came here, you're a foreigner yourself, and you're even to the point of being one of our judges. We're not going to let this thing go like the way you want. We're going to do worse things. If we were thinking of raping these two men, we'll probably rape you and kill you and your family. That's the degree of violence and perversion that these people are looking to do. The world we live in is corrupt and merciless. Don't ever think that this world is our friend. In James it says, the friendship with this world, the love of this world is enmity with God, which goes the other way around too. The world is in enmity with us. Don't think they're your friends. Many times our young people, and even us as adults, we get fooled by the smiling faces and trusting characters of people who are not of the same life. I'm not saying they're necessarily every one of them are bad people, but the thought pattern, the mindset is a merciless mindset. It's a corrupt mindset. The world will let us live and thrive only as much as it is convenient for it and beneficial for its interest. The reason today the world is tolerating Christians is because it still derives some benefit from it. Maybe we're working, maybe we're contributing, maybe we're paying taxes, whatever it is. The world is not excited about Christians being around, but for now, they're tolerating. The day will come that tolerance level will end. And when the Antichrist rises, you're going to see no tolerance, zero tolerance for anyone who calls himself a child of God or a Christian. And hopefully by then we're gone. But the danger is still in front of us. The moment we protest and oppose the way of this world, the world will retaliate with much hostility. The moment we preach the gospel and we say, there's a problem, sin is dominating, Satan is ruling, there is sin that needs to be dealt with. Man is a sinner by nature, for all have sinned and have come short of the glory of God. All the opposition and the powers of the enemy arise to crush and to silence this voice. So, what did the angels do? But the men, in this case the angels, brought Lot into the house and shut the door. They struck the men who were at the doorway with blindness, both small and great, so that they got tired trying to find the doorway. Then the two men said to Lot, whom else you have here? A son-in-law and your sons and your daughters and whomever you have in the city, bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy it, because their outcry has become so great before the Lord that the Lord has set to destroy it. Lot spoke to his sons-in-law who were to marry his daughters. Isn't that amazing? There were people who wanted to marry these girls, and Lot is saying to these men, you know what? Even though they've been betrothed and they're supposed to marry these guys, you can still have them. That's perversion. That is absolute corruption. So, Lot spoke to his sons-in-law who were to marry his daughters and said, "Get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city." But he appeared to his sons-in-law as to be jesting. Here is the lesson. Once a believer loses his or her testimony, no one will take them seriously. They no longer took Lot seriously. You know what? I probably think the sons-in-law heard what Lot was willing to do with the daughters. They said, "Did you hear that he's actually offering your daughter, your future wives, to the population of this city to rape your daughters?" So the sons-in-law said, "Which one do we believe? Your offer to freely give these girls to the city residents, or now you're coming and telling us, oh, there's going to be judgment, let's get out of the city." When you lose your testimony, and you know the problem with Lot was that he had lost his testimony. There was no more testimony. He still had a relationship with the God of Abraham because he remembered he had the unleavened bread, but there was no more testimony because he was deeply entrenched and stuck in a system that he was part of it now. He was no longer distinct. He had lost his flavor. Jesus said when the salt loses its flavor, what do you do with it? Here's a salt that has lost its flavor. A loss of testimony makes a believer the subject of ridicule. People, when they see our lives and our testimony is tainted and failed, people then don't take you seriously and they make you an object of ridicule. Today, the world ridicules Christians based on misrepresentation of Christianity by popular TV preachers and many others. The weak, diluted, compromised, and contaminated Christianity of today, as seen on television, is the reason the world does not take Christianity seriously. The world has no problem with filling all the air times with evangelists and preachers who are just going to get there and preach and do whatever they want to do because they know that they're not serious. They know that's not the message Jesus preached. But they have a problem with this. They have a problem with this. And people who stand on the truth and hold the torch of testimony and are not willing to bend their knees to the prince of the power of the air in this locality, they would have a problem with us. But not with what I call the pop Christianity, the easy, soothing, feel-good Christianity. There are so many of those. I'm not saying every preacher on television is bad. There's some good ones there, but majority are preaching a brand that brand does not make any threats against the enemies. Actually makes them quite interested and fascinated on why Christians are doing what they're doing. And then, of course, they make documentaries about all the abuses and everything else that goes on. So, Lot fails. No one is listening to him. No one is taking him seriously. Actually, the word says they thought he was jesting. You know what jesting is? It was kind of like acting. You know, he's just a show-off. But the man was serious. He was saying, come on, there's a verdict of destruction and death. And I said, oh, come on, you're just like a clown. 2 hours ago, you offered your daughters to the public, and now you're saying, oh, we got to get out of here. The world is getting destroyed. Which one do we believe? The free offering of your daughters or the destruction of the city of Sodom and Gomorrah? Come on, be serious. So when the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, take your wife and the 2 daughters who are here and you will be swept, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he hesitated. So the man seized his hand, just grabbed him, and the hand of his wife and the hands of the two daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him. And they brought him out and put him outside the city. When they had brought them outside, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you. Do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away." But Lot said to them, "My lords, if your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your loving kindness by saving my life, but I cannot escape to the mountains, for the disaster will overtake me and I will die. Now behold, this town is near enough to flee, and it is small. Please let me escape there, that my life may be saved." So he said to them, "Behold," the angel said, "I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town of which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." And the name of that town was Zoar, means small town. So what do we see here? Hesitation. Lot hesitated. You know why he hesitated? Because his heart was attached to Sodom. In our Christian lives, many times God comes and says, "Hurry up, get out, do this, go here." And that is a command. It is not a suggestion. The angels did not make a suggestion to Lot. "Well, take a look at this, analyze it, consider it. The city is about to be destroyed, and they have to give the command, get out." But you know what? Here is another problem. If we are so deeply rooted in this system that it's called the world, the mindset that draws us into this, we will hesitate. You guys think when God will give us a command that we will listen quickly and act on it? I can guarantee you, many of us, starting from me, I will always include me as the first victim, we may hesitate. We may hesitate. You know why? Because our heart is still attached. The Bible doesn't choose any words without a purpose. It says he hesitated. And God had no choice but to force him. Do we want God to drag us out, or are we willing to listen and act as the Lord tells us to do something? I'm not saying that we need to physically get out of the city and hide in the caves. I'm not saying that. But there's a principle. The principle is we've got to detach ourselves from the mindset that is constantly drawing us into a situation where we get entangled in a web of deception and lies that the world constantly spawns. And so we get stuck in that. In Luke chapter 21, verse 34 to 36 says, "Be careful so that your hearts will not be weighed down with dissipation and the worries of life, and that day will come on you suddenly like a trap, for it will come upon everyone on the face of the earth. But stay alert at all times." It looks like Lot was kind of in a state of, half awake and half asleep. He was kind of like a drunk. He doesn't know what's going on. When a believer is not awake and alert, when something like that comes upon us, we find ourselves completely disoriented and lost. I think he was feeling completely disoriented and lost. He didn't know what's going to happen next. He didn't know where to go, and that's why he's hesitating. He's hesitant because he is not awake and alert. Stay alert at all times, praying that you may have the strength to escape all that is about to take place and to stand before the Son of Man. You see the parallel between what Jesus says to his disciples about his coming and the preparation of the disciples, because Lot is giving us a beautiful example of how a believer can get so tied down, he can get so drifted from the purpose that God has called us, that when the time comes, we're not ready and we begin to hesitate. There are many times God gives a command to the church. It gives a direction to the church, and if we're not awake and alert, we will hesitate. And if we hesitate, there's great danger, and sometimes God has no choice but to drag us. It might be very painful. But there's not a little cute point there, and that is God's compassion. Isn't it interesting that in the middle of this disaster that Lot realizes the reason he's in this condition and the reason those angels are there is because God has compassion on him. My brothers and sisters, here's the lesson. Even in the worst conditions we find ourselves in, the Lord still remains compassionate and gracious, and he will do whatever he can to help us or save us. God will not let his children waste away unless we purposely, deliberately choose. But he will always be compassionate. He will always do the first step. He will always reach out. He will always come to save. And Lot realizes that is his only chance. There is no other chance. The Lord has finally, directly through two angels, has come to show compassion to Lot. You know why he was compassionate to Lot? Because first of all, he loved Lot. He didn't deserve this. Lot was a good guy. It's just that he had been fooled by what he had seen. But he also was compassionate to Lot because he loved Abraham. Abraham was his friend. Abraham was his friend. And Abraham had interceded for Lot and his family. When we intercede for someone tonight, when we intercede for someone tomorrow, that intercession will remain with God in his books. And God will show compassion when the right time comes, when there is a disaster, when there's a crisis, when there's a problem. Because we have interceded, don't ever underestimate the value of intercession for someone else. You may not see it today, but someday God will show compassion. That's why we need to fervently pray for our loved ones, for our friends, for people that come across our way. That someday God will arouse his compassion, and that person in that critical moment, God will send his power to save, particularly the children of God, particularly our brothers and sisters. The lesson is that we should never give up on God, because he will never give up on us. God never gives up on us. We may fail, but God does not give up on any one of you. Anyone sitting here tonight, starting from me, do you feel you've done something that you've failed God? You may have, but don't give up on God, because God never gives up on us. He's always willing to take us back. He's always willing to send the angels to come and help us. Never, ever give up on God. To the last breath, we always expect that God will come through, because he never gives up on us. If God would ever give up on us, we would have no hope, and that God is not a God that I want. I want a God that even if I fail, he will never give up on me. That's the kind of God that I want. So he told the angels, don't look back. No matter what happens in our lives, we must not look behind. It can be fatal. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2, it says, let us look unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. And I spoke about this in a sermon one time. We're not supposed to look back. We're not supposed to look down. We're not supposed to look around. We're not supposed to look inside. We're only supposed to look ahead and to Him who is the author and the finisher of our faith. Looking behind leads to distraction. Looking behind slows us down. Have you ever seen someone be able to run a 100-meter dash and look back and run? It cannot happen. You need to focus on that line, on that finish line, and run. Not looking to a stadium of 100,000 people, all the noise, all the view. You block it out and you just look straight to that finish line. You don't do that, because looking behind will distract you, will slow you down. And you know what? When they looked back, or had they looked back, something would have happened that our pastor one time gave a testimony about his life. That he had gone to visit a friend, and that friend was a person who used to work for him. Now he was driving a Cadillac. This is in the 80s when Cadillacs were popular. These big Eldorado Cadillacs. And the guy had an office with $10,000 furniture. He was importing and exporting, and he probably had a few $1,000,000 in his bank account, and used to be working for my dad in the oil industry. And then now my dad comes out and goes, sits in the little Volkswagen Rabbit in the parking lot, and he feels sorry for himself. Says, what am I doing here? Look, I left everything, and look at me, now I'm preacher. And for a moment he testifies, and many times he said the story, that he felt sorry for himself. You know why? Can't blame the man, because he looked back and he remembered where he was, the company and all that glory and all that success and all that achievement. He felt sorry for himself because he, for a moment, looked back. How many of us keep looking back every day to something in our past and say, I wish I was back there? You know what? The country that I came from, the parents I had, the work I used to do, wow, how much did I lose? Looking back distracts you, slows you down, and creates self-pity. The pity party starts. Now let me remember everything that I could have, I should have, I would have, and all that. And you are stopping, and you've stopped dead in your tracks from running. And then when you have self-pity, something worse than that happens. You end up having anger and resentment. It doesn't end with self-pity, and it doesn't end with I wish, or look what happened. Then you say, oh, what a stupid guy I am. What mistakes did I make in my life? I'm worthy of nothing. I'm so much of a fool. I get angry. And then when you're angry and you're looking at a mirage in the past that you cannot even do anything about it, you end up despairing. And you say, you know what? What's the running? So no, it's worth it. It's not worth it. Useless. I'm a nobody. I'm a big zero. I'm not going to get anywhere. Look, all that I lost. What about this? Who cares? I didn't write the next word, apathy. So what? Don't care anymore. Have you gone through that experience, or only Pastor and myself? The two of us. Forget it. Not worth it. Useless. But that's the problem of looking back. The angels knew the danger of looking back. Don't look back. But that's not the end. Don't look back, and then, of course, don't stay in the valley. Now, he had gone down to the valley, and that disaster had happened to him. Now the angels say, you're here, go back up. Don't stay down here, because that is not where you should be. If Lot had stayed in the valley, he would have been in close proximity to destruction. The valley represents failure, lack of ascendancy, a lack of vision. You can't see anything when you're in a valley because everything around you is blocking your vision. God's instructions were to escape to the mountains. that represent ascendancy, a higher vantage point, a better vision and power. In warfare, anyone who's on the top of the hill is the one that has got control, got the vantage point, has got the power. Anyone who's down there is at a disadvantage. And God says to Lot, you lived here long enough, you're paying the price for it, now get out of here, but just don't wander in the valley, go up. When God visits us, when God finds us, when God rescues us, when God meets us, when God wants to heal us, when God wants to do a deep work, if we've been in the valleys, He says, enough is enough. Now it's time for you to go up. We are not moving parallel, we're moving up to go where we were not before. You see, every failure that brings us into the valley is an opportunity to go to the mountains. If it's only here to be in the valley and no use and no reason to be in the valley, then God says, I taught you the lesson, now you go up to the mountain. Interesting enough, do you know where Mr. Abraham was all this time? He was always in the top. Because it says in the next verse, when he woke up in the morning, he looked down in the valley, he saw the smoke. That's the difference between Abraham and Lot. Of course, Abraham was not a perfect man. He also had his failures. But at least he was at a better position because he had a closer relationship with God. So here is an excuse of a hesitant believer. This is the number one excuse of a hesitant believer. I one time took the young people to my house and I showed them a 60s movie that they never forgive me for that movie. It's played by Don Knotts. You know, the Three's Company, Mr. Furley. He's a kind of a funny guy. In the 60s, he was younger and better looking. He played a movie called The Hesitant Astronaut, or Reluctant Astronaut. The guy was in a theme park in a fake spaceship that little kids would go there, pay money, and he would take them and, entertain them. And he wrote a letter to NASA to get a job, or someone wrote for him as an astronaut. And NASA sent him a letter saying, you've been accepted, come to NASA. And then he goes to NASA, finds out that the job is not really a job of an astronaut, but a janitor. It just came from NASA. And then he had to fake to his whole family and the city because they thought, my son is going to NASA to be the next astronaut, but he was a janitor. So he had to fake. It's a funny story. But the thing is that he was a reluctant astronaut. I want to call reluctant, hesitant believers. The number one reason we are a reluctant believer is we say, I cannot. Lot said to the angels, sorry, can I say something? They said, okay, what is it you want to say? Cannot go on top of the mountain. Lot was afraid of disasters that may happen to him while climbing the mountain. He forgot that this destruction is right behind him. See what a guy. The city is about to explode and he's worried about climbing up the mountain. Maybe the tigers are going to eat him up or the bears tear him up, but he doesn't care about what's about to happen behind him. You see how his measurement, how his assessment, how his mind has been so damaged that he cannot see what is about to happen to him. He's worried about if I go up, something may happen to him and I may get killed. Once in a carnal condition, any spiritual movement becomes difficult. A believer who cannot trust the Lord and becomes fearful of movement and advancement will be deprived of the millennial kingdom of Christ. You know how I say that? In the book of Revelation chapter 21, it says, those who are cowards are not going to enter. Cowards. Did you know cowards are not going to enter? Cowards. Cowards are people who God has told them, I want you to go, and they're hesitant. You're coward. You cannot trust God. You cannot believe that God is able. So you're a coward. I cannot. The sun rose over the earth when Lot came to Zoar, and the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven and overthrew those cities and the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities. and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Now Abraham rose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord and looked down. So where was Abraham? High hills. Towards Sodom and Gomorrah and the valley, and saw the smoke of the land ascended like smoke of a furnace. When God destroyed the cities, he remembered Abraham and set Lot out of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities where Lot lived. Did I tell you intercession of Abraham had paid off? There it is. It says he remembered Abraham. And because of Abraham, he went to rescue Lot. Well, a few more points and I'm done. Lot's wife. Lot's wife was not only hesitant, just like her husband, but stopped and looked back. The instruction was, do not look back. This kind of believer is in danger of failing to reach anywhere safe. Pillars in the Bible speak of testimony. In this case, it is not a good testimony. She did not become an edible salt. By the way, there's a different kinds of salts. She did not become a tasty salt that people would say, wow, what a beautiful thing she has become. Because there are mentions of salt in the Bible where Jesus said, you're the salt of the world. Well, that's not the same salt he's referring here. That's a different salt. The church needs to be that kind of a salt, but not this kind of a salt. This salt is not an edible salt because it became, the salt was created because of that severe and rapid wind that came from the explosion that happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. Archaeologists have discovered that right where the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah have been discovered by the Dead Sea, there are huge sulfur mines. Sulfur mines. And you know, sulfur can ignite very quickly, and it creates not a normal fire, but a very distinct odor and color, and also the winds can carry, and it just covers you with ashes. When it says she became a pillar of salt, it was not just an ordinary household, you know, I can take a little bit of his wife and sprinkle it over my salad and it gives me a good taste. No, not that kind of a salt. It was the salt of judgment. She had been covered with the ashes of destruction. She had become a testimony of a hesitant believer who not only hesitated, but also looked back. And the reason she looked back is because her heart was still very much in Sodom. She was burned and salted as a witness of God's seriousness about the destiny of this world and our contempt for God's warnings. It was the same, I'm mentioning a New Testament verse. It was the same as it happened in the days of Lot. They were eating and drinking, buying, selling, planting, building. But on that day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. It will be the same on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. On that day, one who is on the housetop, whose goods are in the house, must not go down to take them out. And likewise, one who is in the field must not turn back. Didn't the angels say, go up to the valley, don't come down? Didn't the angels say, don't look back? Both of them are mentioned here. Don't go down from your housetop, in other words, from the mountain to the valley. Don't look back. And Jesus only said a 3-word sentence. I think this is the second shortest verse, perhaps, in the Bible. The shortest verse is in Gospel of John chapter 11. It says, Jesus wept. 2 words. Here is 3 words. Remember Lot's wife. And immediately says, whosoever seeks to keep his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it. For this reason, in our Hebrews, chapter 2, verse 1 to 4. See the similarity of this story and how the writers are taking themes from that story and giving us admonition in the New Testament. For this reason, we must pay much closer attention. What is that reason that he's talking about there? In chapter 1, verse 14 of Hebrews, the writer says, God has brought his angels to minister to those who are inheriting salvation. Isn't that the same thing that those angels came to serve Lot and his family, to bring them out into a salvation from destruction? For this reason, we must pay closer attention to what we have heard. Church, you must hear. We must hear what God is saying in this church so that we do not drift away from it. For if the word spoken through angels proved unalterable, didn't the word of the angels prove unalterable to Lot and his family? See, you can take the cases and show how it is true what he's saying. And every transgression and disobedience received a just penalty. It did happen. How will we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? After it was at first spoken through the Lord, it was confirmed to us by those who heard. God also testifying with them both by signs and wonders and by various miracles and gifts of the Holy Spirit according to his own will. Life choices. Whoever seeks to keep his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it. So, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, what do you want to keep? And what do you want to give? Your soul? Your self-life? Your selfish ambitions and interests? Do you want to give those or keep them? Remember in the game show on television, Let's Make a Deal. If you haven't seen it, the younger generation, on YouTube you can say, let's make a deal. And this host used to come there and people would dress up like weird stuff just to catch the attention of the MC. And they would say, pick me, pick me, pick me. So he would come and say, okay, what are you? I says, I'm dressed up like a donkey. Okay. Do you want what's behind curtain number 1 or curtain number 2 or curtain number 3? Or I'll give you right now $200 in cash. Let's make a deal. And people would take sometimes, $200? What's on behind the curtain number 2 or 3 or 1? Might be much bigger. And sometimes there was a car. Sometimes there was sewing machine or something. But sometimes when they pulled the curtain, they found out that there was 200 cans of tuna. So let's make a deal. You see, the enemy plays with us this game, let's make a deal. But which one do you want? What do you want? Which side outweighs the other? It's a sad commentary at the end of this chapter. It says, God overthrew the cities where Lot lived. You see, the focus is not on the people. The focus is where Lot lived. They were natural to their city, but Lot was not natural to that city. A believer is not natural to this environment. A believer is supposed to be heavenly. But if you become earthly, this is not your home. It says he destroyed the cities where Lot lived. Why was Lot unwilling to leave? Because he lived in Sodom. It was his home. It had become his home. A child of God will never fully be happy in an environment of compromise and contaminations. In the end, Lot lost the world and also the blessings of God. There's a verse in 2 Peter that says Lot, even though he lived in Sodom, he was never a happy man. He was never a happy man. That verse is in 2 Peter. It says he was tormented day and night. Don't think because we end up compromising and living in the environment that is right now welcoming us and giving us every benefit and everything that seems to be good, deep in our hearts, there's a pain, there's an ache. We're not happy. We can never be happy here. I know people who've left the church life, left their relationship with God, and have gone deep into the crevices of the world. And when you talk to them, there's a sadness in their eyes. They're not happy. They may be enjoying everything, but they're not happy. Lot went from Zoar and stayed in the mountains with his 2 daughters, and he was afraid to stay in Zoar. The firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us." There was no man. It ended just because Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. There was no more men out there. She forgot that the dating sites. Let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may preserve our family through him. So they made him drink wine, and the firstborn lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or arose. The next day the firstborn said to the younger, "I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you may go and lie with him, that you may preserve our family." So they made their father drink wine again, and the younger lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or arose. There's not much to say. It's such a sad, sad story. There's no explanation. There's no need to tell you what a horrible tragedy it is. It starts with what? With Lot having a problem with the sheep and the shepherds. It ends with a drunkard whose daughters are now abusing him. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of all the Moabites to this day. As for the younger, she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the sons of Ammon to this day. Moab and Ben-Ami. Moab means of his father. Ben-Ami means the son of my people. These 2 groups will be the enemies, mortal enemies of the children of Israel in the future. And here's the conclusion. Flesh gives birth to flesh, and flesh that has been given birth to and by the flesh will always war with the spirit. In Galatians chapter 5, Paul says there is a battle between flesh and the spirit. And Moabites and Ammonites became the mortal enemies of the people of Israel. Of his father, Moab. What kind of father? You know, you can always take pride in who your father is, but what kind of father do you want to take pride in? Moab. That father? Sons of my people. What kind of people? Tragic. Very tragic. And next week we'll go to chapter 20. I'll bless you, Pastor.